So LeBron James was born December 30th, 1984 to 16-year-old Gloria James. Now, by their own admonition, they were extremely poor. They lived in Akron, Ohio, and it was LeBron and his mom. His father wasn't involved in his life at all. He's still not to this day. And he talked about, I've seen a lot of interviews with him where he's talked about the conditions in which they lived the majority of his childhood. Most of the time, they never really had a place to stay. It was bouncing around from friend's house to friend's house, whoever let them sleep on a couch or on the floor or whatever. And for a long period of time, they actually lived out of a car that his mom was able to save up some money and buy. And so the majority of his childhood was extremely poverty-stricken. And what happened is one day, he was playing, I think they said he was 7 or 8 years old. He was playing on a playground with some of his friends. And look, I get it. Some of y'all are such hardcore Carolina Tar Heel fans that you can't even fathom in your mind that LeBron James could even be the greatest. We're not going to talk about that, all right? But this is what I will say about LeBron James as far as being a basketball player is he is a freak of nature athletically. If you were to build a basketball player, you can do that in like 2K. If you want to build a basketball player, he's 6'8", about 260 pounds of solid muscle, can run like a 4.4, jump out of the gym. Usually when he jumps up, his head just about hits the rim. I've seen him like dunk before where his head went above the rim. I'm like, I just want my finger to graze the rim whenever I jump. I just want to graze the rim if at all possible. But if you were going to build a basketball player, it would look like LeBron James, maybe not facially, but whatever, okay? Might make him a little bit different in the face. But this gentleman saw him playing on the playground with some young kids, and he said, I thought this dude was like 15, 16 years old at the time. He was 7 years old, almost 6 foot tall. And so he was a Pee Wee football coach. And LeBron James has even said to this day that his first love was football. He started off as a football player, and I can't imagine somebody his size and his, on the football field. Like, there's actually been NFL teams to this day that have offered him contracts to play football with them. It's crazy to think about. He's that athletic. But this Pee Wee football coach saw LeBron James, and he was like, he's playing with all these little kids, found out they were the same age. He couldn't believe that they were the same age. He's like, hey, y'all play football? And they were like, well, we like football. And so what happened was I guess the guy decided, I'll invite all of them to play just so I can get LeBron. I can get all these little kids, and maybe I can get LeBron out of it. So he went and talked to LeBron James' mom, Gloria, and she said, look, that's fine. He can play football, but I have no money. I have no way of getting him to and from practices, games, all that kind of stuff. So if he's going to play, somebody's going to have to give him a ride. He's like, don't worry about it. I will handle everything, okay? So like I said earlier, they bounced around from house to house. After a while, he got tired of trying to hunt LeBron down. They didn't have cell phones. He couldn't find where he was at. It was like a word-of-mouth thing. Well, I think he's staying with so-and-so. And so finally he went to Gloria and LeBron, and he's like, look, y'all can just live with me. So this kid was so good at football and so big that he was like, you know what, y'all can just stay with me. I want to win that bad. So LeBron James moved in with this gentleman, and the rest is kind of history. After that, they still lived a very, humble life, and they still didn't have a lot. But LeBron attended what was called St. Vincent St. Mary's High School. It's a Catholic school in Akron, Ohio. And I remember the first time I ever heard of LeBron James. He's a year older than I am. So when I was in the 10th grade, every morning I had a routine. I'd wake up and I'd watch ESPN. Now, I don't do that anymore because I cut my cable because it's a waste of money. But cut my cable. But I used to watch it back then. Every morning I'd wake up and watch SportsCenter before I went to school. And I was catching up on some scores, and they showed some highlights from this high school basketball game. I'm like, why aren't they showing a high school basketball game in the middle of the season? And they show this kid. He's real skinny, but he's tall, and he is like making these other players look like they're toddlers running around him. He's jumping up and like having to move his head so he wouldn't hit the rim, and I'm like, what is this? This dude is crazy. Like, somebody needs to check his birth certificate. Like, how in the Little League World Series they always sneak in some older kids? I was like, that dude's 35. Like, there's no way that he's not 35 years old. Okay, but I remember from that point on, I was like, I followed everything, because he was right at my age, and I was like, I want to see what becomes of LeBron James. And so there's probably never been an athlete that was more hyped up at a young age than LeBron James. There's never been anybody. Even Michael Jordan didn't have that kind of hype coming out of high school. But for the most part, whether you agree with it or not, he has lived up to the hype. And, I think about, think about it like this, okay? He was 18 years old. He bypassed going to college, and everybody got mad at him because he didn't go to college. I'm like, dude, it's either go to college for a few years to get a job. You go to college to get a job. If you know you got a job and going to make millions of dollars right out of high school, no school for me. Like, that ain't happening. So he came straight out of high school. We went from 18 years old, not a dollar to his name, to $44 million overnight. Now, if I was 18 years old and you handed me $44 million, you would see me going crazy. Like, I'd be wilding out. I'd be riding down the street in a limo with my head out, shooting the money guns. You know how they got the guns that shoot the money out? $44 million, I'm going to blow a bunch of it right here. But LeBron James didn't do all that, despite actually being a really good role model, never been in trouble with the law, never seen him in the news for drugs, alcohol. He married his high school sweetheart. Her name's Savannah. They have 3 children together. They got LeBron James Jr. He's actually really good at basketball, too. And for his age, he's 14 and he's dunking. What is that? Like, he's passed that genetics on to his son. He goes by Bronny, and he's really good. I don't know if he's going to live up to his dad, but he looks like he might have a chance. He's got another son named Bryce, and he's got a little 4-year-old girl named Zuri, and she is cute as you can even imagine. She's adorable. I looked up a picture at her, and I was like, man, I want to adopt a child that looks like that. But despite all of that, never getting in trouble, being a family man, LeBron James is one of the most ridiculed people in the world. By far, one of the most ridiculed sports figures of all times. And I don't expect you to leave here today. The point of this sermon isn't to make you like LeBron or whatever. And look, I understand too that a little while back, somebody asked him his opinion about Donald Trump. And if you're a Donald Trump supporter, we don't talk about politics really, but he said his opinion about Donald Trump, and a lot of you don't like what he said. And all I got to say is everybody's got an opinion, and if somebody stuck a mic in your face and asked you your opinion, a lot of people wouldn't like you. Okay? So let's not judge somebody or put them in a negative light because they have an opinion. Everybody's got one, right? All right. So this isn't a message to try to defend LeBron, but I want to talk to you about a new criticism that I saw of LeBron James lately, and it has to do with the I Promise School. Had anybody heard of the I Promise School before this morning? Okay. Whenever we were getting ready for this series, I was the person that said something about we were spitballing ideas of guys or people that we could talk about, and I said LeBron James, and I said it for a reason, for a subject that I thought that I would speak on. And as I got closer and closer to doing this sermon, it changed. And it was because of me doing something that is extremely dangerous to do. I was watching videos about the I Promise School, and I was on YouTube, and I decided to read some comments. That is a cesspool of negativity, but I just decided to see what people were saying about it. So I'm going to read you a couple of comments that I found about the LeBron James I Promise School. One of them said this: LeBron James cherry picks inner city black kids to spoil because that's what he wished he had as a child. That's super nice. This is a really good one too. So only 240 kids from his hometown get to reap the benefits of this school. What a joke of a human being. I sat back and there was literally hundreds of comments like that. I just picked a couple that I thought were safe for me to read without the cussing in it. We don't have the bleep button in the back. They can't keep up with me that way. They're doing good back there, though. We got some new folks back there killing it in the back. Shout out to my people. But I sat there and I kept reading these comments, and I'm like, this man, like, he's a good role model. He's a family guy. outside of whatever your allegiance is to on the court play, like you got to respect the man. But I'm like, how in the world does, no matter what this guy does, people are just bashing him? And we've talked about this before. So every once in a while, somebody will complain about something that's going on in the church, and you'll be, what you're doing is super nice, and people will still complain about it. We talked and we joked one time. We said we could stand at the door of the church and literally hand a $100 bill out to every person that left and say, thank you for coming, and somebody would get offended. I can't believe you're giving out money at the church. What are you doing? Somebody hands me a $100 bill, I ask no questions, and I leave. Like, thank you. All right. I'm getting out of here before they decide to take this back. Okay? But this isn't going to go in the direction that you probably think. So I want you to think for a second about all the bad things in the world. All the bad things in the world. And I'm a big-time comic book fan and superhero movies and stuff. And there was a movie. It was a Superman movie. It's called Superman Returns. It came out in the mid-2000s. It was terrible. But I like Superman, so I watched it. There's a scene in that movie where he's up in outer space, and he's got his eyes closed, and he can hear all the bad things going on in the world. And I'm like, what does that feel like? You can literally hear everything bad that's going on in the world. And for a lot of us, information is so readily available. The news, there's so, and it's all negative. It's very rare that it's something positive. You see all the bad things happening, and it can overwhelm your mind. It can just drive you nuts. For most of us, well, a big majority of us, I'm not calling you old, but for a big portion of the crowd, even when I was a kid, the only bad things that you knew about that were happening within your circles, because there wasn't as readily accessible news, and the internet wasn't really a thing, and the only bad things you knew about, the only natural disasters you knew about is if there was a hurricane coming to your area, or there was a tornado that touched down in your community, or somebody's house burnt down, or somebody was getting a divorce, or whatever was going on. All the bad things happening, you only knew about what was going on in your circle. But nowadays, as Christians, it's super overwhelming. I've kind of desensitized myself, and I think a lot of us have done the same thing, is I try my best to avoid the news. And like I said earlier, I got rid of cable and Time Warner, Spectrum, whatever they call themselves these days. They're always calling me and trying to get me to, they're like, we'll lower your internet price and we can bundle cable. I don't want cable. I don't need it. I can just watch whatever I want without it. And so finally, they called me and they was like, look, we can keep your internet the same speed, and we're going to give you the Spectrum app, and you can choose 50 or 60 channels to be on the app, and you can watch it. I was like, so it's going to cost me the same. All right, I'll try it. I was like, is there a trial period? They were like, yeah, it's you get a free month. I was like, all right, so I'll cancel it when the month's over. I'm still in the middle of it. But anybody ever do that? Yeah, I'll try it, and then I cancel it. That's terrible. Why y'all doing that? They asked me, I was like, so can I go online and change the channels? No, you can't do that. You got to pick them right now. I was like, all right. So they start going through and listing all the news networks. I'm like, I don't want the news. I don't care about the news unless it's Sports Center. I don't want to hear it. So I don't watch the news. I try my best to stay away from it because it starts bogging down my mind. I get so distraught and upset. So if we're being honest, as a Christian, when you see all the bad stuff, is there really much we can do? As one person, is there much we can do? Really ain't a whole lot you can do. And that's, you get in this situation where you're like, I see all this bad that's happening, but I can't really do anything about it. What am I supposed to do about it? And what happens is we sit back, and every now and then we feel like we should do something, and you're like, it ain't going to help. Even if I do this little thing, it's not going to help. So a lot of times we just don't do anything. So as Christians, can we get away with that? Can we get away with not doing anything whenever we see needs? I don't think we can. Okay? So this is what the rest of this sermon is going to look like. As you know, if you've heard me preach, I'm not long-winded. It's lunchtime. Okay? So I'm going to try to get you out of here pretty quick. And as a kid, that's all I was concerned about. Whenever my dad was preaching, I'm like, I am starving. You need to wrap this up. Okay, like I'm ready to go home and get some food. But the rest of this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a couple scriptures from the Apostle Paul in Galatians, and I'm going to give you 3 tips to go along with the main thought that we have today, and then I'm going to tell you a personal story. So if you turn to Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, the Apostle Paul is talking, and this goes along with the feeling of being overwhelmed. It says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." At the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. It talks about being weary. Weary means tired. And if we're being honest, if we tried, if we were trying to help somebody out, and we tried to go with every need that we see and try to make a difference, we would get exhausted. It would be just about impossible to hit every need that we run across. But, it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible. But in verse 10, he goes on and says this, "Therefore, as we have opportunity." Now, the literal translation of the word opportunity in the text means time. Opportunity and time, basically the same thing. "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers." He even, earlier in the chapter, verse 2 says this when he's talking. He says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Now, this brings us to the kind of the main idea of this sermon. So, how many of you ever had an experience like this as a kid? And it usually started as a kid. I can remember a very specific time that this happened to me. I was in middle school, and we lived in St. Mary's, Georgia. In middle school, they actually had vending machines in the hallways. This is also a food-related illustration because that's what I like. So I remember we had a substitute teacher. I was in 7th grade, and I really, my mom, she took care of her boy and made sure he had money to get all the food he wanted. All right? That's right. I love you, Mom. But so I had plenty of money, and I was like, I got lunch money, and I got some extra money. I really would like to go to the vending machine. I was a pretty good kid. I didn't really cause much problem. So I go up to the substitute teacher. I don't remember his name. I was like, so-and-so, think I could go down the hall to the vending machine? He's like, I can't do that. I'm like, why? He's like, well, if I let you go, I got to let everybody go. And I'm like, no, you don't. That's the worst thing to ever say to anybody. How many of y'all have ever said to your children, well, if I do it for you, I got to do it for your brother and sister? Stop doing that. Just say no. You ain't got to qualify it. You're the authority figure. Just be like, no. All right? Because what happens is that gets stuck in our mind growing up. Now, I remember standing there and I couldn't fathom why I couldn't go. I thought of all these scenarios as I walked back to my seat. I'm like, dude, you could give me a hall pass. I'll pretend I'm going to the bathroom. I'll go to the vending machine. And I won't tell anybody. If you want me to, I'll go in the bathroom and eat my food. I'll go in the bathroom and eat, come back, nobody's got to know. I'm not going to snitch. It never made sense to me, well, if I do it for you, I got to do it for everybody. And what's happened is we've carried that over into our way of thinking as we grow up. So as Christians, we do this thing where we see a lot of needs going on. And you look and you see something that's going on and you're like, I really would like to, I'm going to help, I'm going to do something about that. But then you're like, well, how do I decide? There's a lot of people that's got that problem. If I do it for them, I'm going to have to do it for a lot more people. And so we do this thing where we just kind of turn a blind eye to the situation. And I am extremely guilty of this. I do this a lot, and I think most of you would admit that you do this. How many of you feel like you've ever done this before? So we got some liars in here. All right. I told them in the last service, this altar's always open. You can come and repent at any time. Okay? All right. So, it always bothered me so much. If I got to do it for you, if I do it for you, I got to do it for everybody. And this is what, if you don't leave here with anything else, if you leave here with nothing else, I want you to leave here with this thought in your mind. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And the video I showed of LeBron James, and I sat there and I watched a bunch of them, and I'm like, that's awesome. And then I start reading the comments. I'm like, so if if he adopted the principle of, well, since I can't do it for all of the kids in my city, then I'm just not going to do it for any of the kids in my city. No, that makes no sense whatsoever. Why would he ever do that? Now, everything I've read about the I Promise School, it's going to expand, I think, up to grade 8 or something like that. So it'll probably have, I think, 400 or 500 students before it's over with. And a lot of people got mad because it's got like a lot of his stuff in the building. Well, you got to think about this. He's trying to inspire these kids that they can make it out. So they're keeping visual of somebody that made it out. So I don't understand people always criticizing. Just shut up. Like, just let it go. Somebody's trying to actually do good, and maybe you should do more good with your life. And all right. So I want to give you three tips, 3 ways that you can do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. The first one is this: go deep rather than wide. Go deep rather than wide. This is what I mean by that. So don't just, if you see a need, don't just throw a little bit of money in one direction. Don't see a need, like let's say, for example, everybody's getting ready to go back to school. You've got some kids, you got young kids, and one of them comes up to you and says, Mom, Dad, one of my really good friends at school, they weren't able to get any school supplies because their family can't afford it, and you kind of sit back and you think to yourself, I could probably buy them some stuff, and then a lot of times we don't do it because you're like, well, I can't buy for everybody. But what I mean is instead of just, if you decide that you want to help, don't just, all right, I'm gonna give a few school supplies and be done with it. Invest in those people. Get to know those people. This isn't like a short-term thing. I want you to go deep with that family or that person or that group of people. Go deep, not wide. All right? If you just throw a little bit of money all over the place, you're never going to invest and really develop meaningful relationships with those kind of people. The second one is this: go long-term rather than short-term. Go long-term rather than short-term. Good example of this, a couple years ago when Josh became youth pastor, my wife comes to me and she goes, Josh is going to be youth pastor. I was like, yes. She goes, well, we're going to help him, right? And I'm like, I guess. I'm like, I don't know, maybe. She's like, yeah, we're going to help him. He's family. We got to help him. My wife's super family oriented. I was like, all right, well, we'll help him. Like, she drugged me along. I'll be 100% honest with you. I was youth pastor once years ago, and I'm kind of like with the youth. They're kind of like puppies to me. If I get too close to them, I'll get attached. So for the longest time, I was like, I don't want to get near them, so I ain't got to get attached to any of them. Okay? If you bring a puppy around my house, it's going to stay. I've got a herd, okay? But she was like, yeah, we're going to help out. So shortly after she decided that's what we were going to do, she also decided, she was like, I feel like we should work with the band kids. The band was trying to get a thing started, and she was like, we're going to spend the majority of our time with this 10 to 12 youth. And I was like, I know some of these hoodlums. I don't want to spend all my time with them. I don't want to do that. So over the course of the last 2 years, we've developed a long-term relationship with these kids. And they're still hoodlums, and they're crazy, and they tell me stuff I don't want to know. Like, we've developed deep relationships with them, and like they'll tell me stuff. I'm like, don't tell me that. I don't want to know that. Don't know. Go talk to your mom and daddy. Don't tell me. I don't want to. I'm not a counselor. I don't want to give advice all the time. But we know, and we've just come to realize that it is a long-term relationship, and we'll never be able to shake them. Like, they're always going to be there texting us. They're going to be 35 years old, wanting me to help them out with something. But develop long-term relationships. Go long-term rather than short-term. And the last one is this: go time, not just money. Go time, not just money. Now, a lot of you, there's a lot of needs you see, and you think that you can fix it with monetary resources, but just because you don't have the money to fix an issue don't mean you can't still help. You can donate your time. You can donate your time to somebody. You can give your time to a group, to a family, to somebody that you know is in need. It's not always about money. It's about investing your time with somebody. And as long as you're giving your time, then everything will work itself out. Now, I want to tell a story, and I tried to get permission from the young man that this involved, but I couldn't get up with him in time, and he's stationed in Japan. So, but I know him. We're really close. We've been close for years, and so I know he wouldn't mind me telling his story. So, back in 2007, I believe it was, I was a youth pastor at Cross Point, and at that time, Cross Point Church was over by the airport. I was on Claude Lee Road, and it was a very weird time for us as a church. We were in the building was kind of a weird setup building, and it was super expensive. It was like an arm and a leg to rent the place. And there was a lot of good people that started coming to our church that are still coming to our church when we were out there. And it was a weird season in the life of our church. And so what happened was in those days, I was youth pastor. I was about 20 years old at the time. And I was just got done being a teenager, and then I'm the youth pastor. I drove a little Mitsubishi Eclipse, and if you know anything about an Eclipse, is two people can fit in there, basically. Two, okay-sized people. It's got a place in the back for, toddlers or something. I don't know. So that's what I drove around, and every Sunday night we'd have youth stuff, youth activities, and I'd have, 20 kids call me. Hey, can you come pick me up? Dude, I drive an Eclipse, and at the time I'm driving my sister around. There's enough room for me and her, and, that's it. So for a while, I'd pick up one or two kids, and then it got to the point where people were asking me so much, I kind of developed the whole, I can't pick up everybody, so I just ain't going to pick up anybody thing. So people would ask me, can you come pick me up? No, I can't. I ain't got enough room, and I can't pick you up. So I started to develop that mindset. So what I would do is if I'd ask somebody if they needed a ride, where you live at? And then I'd find somebody that I knew was coming that lived close to them, swing by and pick them up, that kind of thing. So I got kind of, off track with that thinking. But I remember one Sunday, it was after church. Back then we only had one service. And I'm standing outside of the church, and this lady comes up to me. Her name's Glenda Morris, and she's a great lady. She comes up to me, and she goes, Micah, there's my nephew. He just moved here from Georgia with my sister. It's just him and his mom. She's a single mom, and they're living by themselves in a little apartment off of Gillespie Street near the Coliseum. She was like, he don't know nobody, and I think he'd really enjoy coming to youth stuff. Could you go pick him up? And I'm so used to telling people I can't give him a ride, but if he gets here, we'll treat him right, all that kind of stuff. And something told me was just say yeah, just say you'll go get him. So I decided to go pick him up. She gave me the address, and I went, and I met Jaquan, is his name, for the first time. Now, some of y'all remember Jaquan. You've been here long enough. Jaquan was one of my favorite people ever. Still is. And he was a character. So he's a skinny little African-American kid, real langy, and they didn't have very much. I remember when I first met him, the reason I thought about Jaquan for this sermon is because it's a very similar story about Lebron James and his mom. But I remember going in their little apartment, and they didn't have much. They had a couch and a little TV, and he didn't even, at the time, he didn't have a regular bed to sleep on. But he was always this really happy kid, always smiling, just loved life. He was very studious, and he loved to read. And I remember I'd go pick him up. He'd always bring a book with him. He loved to read stuff. One night, I pick him up for a youth group, and he's holding a Danielle Steele book. That's like a romance novel. I'm like, dude, what are you reading? He's like, well, my mom's got all these romance novels, and I done read everything else in the house. So he liked to read romance novels that his mom got through with. I was like, man, why don't you let me know? We can go to the library. I got books at the house. We'll get you something else to read and get you a magazine or something. But he was always very studious, and he always he worked very, very hard for his grades. He went to Douglas Byrd. I think he ended up graduating number 2 in his class. He did really well, but he was one of these kids too that it didn't just come naturally to him. He worked hard for it. And he studied his butt off all the time. And he loved coming to youth events, but every once in a while I call him and be like, hey, I'm going to come pick you up tonight. He's like, Mike, I can't come. I got a test tomorrow, and I'm just not ready for it. I always knew if he said that, I was just going to let him be, because if Jaquan said he wasn't ready, he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to quit studying. He wouldn't feel good about it. Like, he'd worry himself to death. And just our relationship went over the course of, well, it's still going on to this day, but I remember when he got ready to go off to college, he ended up getting a full scholarship because he did so well. And his second year, he became an RA. They asked him to be an RA. He actually made money going to school. See, all you got to do is get good grades, and it may work out for you. You got a new fresh start this year. You're starting with 100s across the board. Let's see if we can keep it that way. But I remember right before he left, because he was super involved, and Jaquan was one of these people that he had an infectious personality. He can make you feel so good about yourself. He would sit on the front row during praise and worship, and he was one of the only people that had rhythm on the front row back then. He'd dance, and there's this thing that happens with white people, and when you're a drummer and you don't have ears in where you can block out the noise, the white folks can start going all crazy with the clapping. And if you hear that in your ear, what I would do is I look at Jaquan. Jaquan's on beat. All right, there it is, right there. All right, I knew he was my home base if I couldn't hear good. But he was always on the front row, and he was dancing and praising and worshiping. And I remember he came up to me right before he got ready to go to college, and he's like, Micah, he's like, once I go to college, I ain't going to be able to come very much anymore. I'm like, man, I ain't worried about you. I ain't worried about you at all, because I know that you're going to get involved somewhere, and you're going to make good decisions. And so years go by, he graduates. I think he carried a 4.0 all the way through college too. And he kind of changed his plans because the Navy offered him, he did ROTC and stuff, they offered him a really good job right out of college. And he jumped into that career field, and he's in the Navy now, and he's been all over the place. And about 6 months ago, I get a text message from Jaquan. I hadn't heard from him in a couple years. And I was like, I was surprised to get it. He's like, Micah, he was in Virginia, I think is where he was stationed at. He's like, hey, I'm coming home to Fayetteville for a couple days. He said, I want to come see my Cross Point family and see you. And he said, I'm about to be stationed in Japan. I'll be gone for a few years. I want to come see everybody. I was like, all right, cool. It's been a while since I've seen him. And, if you try to talk to me on Sunday mornings before church starts, don't get offended if I don't hear what you're saying. Because I get so, I'm trying to do so many things and make sure everything's going on that I'm in kind of another world. I promise I'm a whole lot nicer than I look on Sunday mornings. Okay, and I saw some of them shaking their head in the back. I'll get you later. But so that Sunday morning, I got so wrapped up in what was going on that I forgot that he told me he was going to come. And I believe it was Holly. She came out and she goes, Micah, Jaquan's here. And I was like, oh man, I forgot he's. So I walk in the lobby and I see him, and he's tall, he's gotten really tall. He's been working out. He's filled out. He looks like a man. I'm like, dang man, you grew up. You're like a dude now. I hear you. Navy's been good to you. And he's dressed super sharp. Got on, I think he had on some Gucci glasses or something. I was like, oh, I hear you. I see what's going on. But I talked to him for a long time in the church, and he went around seeing people that he hadn't seen in years. And we get ready, and I'm fixing to walk outside, and he was one of the last people here, and I'm out there talking to him. And I want to go back to the first scripture that I read, Galatians 6:9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. I'm going to try not to get emotional, okay? So at that particular season of my life, I was feeling very burnt out. Spiritually, working in the church, it can be very easy to do whenever you do a lot of things. You kind of lose sight of the real reason why you do what you do. And let me also preface it with this. I'm not telling you this to brag, because if you know me, that's not how I am. I'm telling you this because I think about how this happened, and I wonder of all the opportunities I missed. I can't speak to the opportunities I missed, but I can speak to the one that hopefully I got right. And so Jaquan, he's still the same kind of guy. I'm standing outside with him, and I was tired. I'd been up since about 5:30, and I was just ready to go home. Second service was over, ready to go get some food, as usual. And he's talking to me, and he, just out of nowhere, he goes, "You changed my life." And I was like, "Come again? Like, what you talking about?" He's like, "Well," he said, I didn't have anything to do with my dad. He wasn't in my life. And he said, "You started hanging out with me, bringing me to church." And he said, "My life could have went in a totally different direction if you hadn't spent time with me." And I'm like, nobody ever really verbalizes these things anymore. And so I'm like, I just stared at him. I was like, you talking to me? And he just kept going on and telling me about how, like, and he could, like, tell me, like, devotions that I had with him. I'm like, dude, that was like 8 years ago. You don't actually remember that, do you? And he told me, he said, "I remember there was one night when I was in college." He said, "I was about to make a really bad choice." And he said, "I was sitting there, and I thought, I don't think Mike would want me to do this." And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" He's like, "I remembered." And he started telling me this, like, devotion that I had with him. He goes, "I remember you told us that the choices we make can last for a lifetime." He said, "I didn't want to make a bad choice." I was like, well, daggone. I'm standing out there, and, you know, I'm in a season of my life where I feel like what I'm doing isn't making a difference. And like the scripture says, at the proper time, you reap the harvest. And for me, you know, the harvest for me for that was just hearing it. I don't have to have everybody come and tell me that something I did affected them. As a matter of fact, that's like the only time I've ever heard that. But it made like a lasting impression on me. I remember, like, I just talked to him, and he has a way of building you up. And by the time he left, I was in such a good mood, and I got in my car and I started driving home, and I just started crying because I was like, I did for one, and it made a difference. I couldn't do it for all the kids. And, you know, sometimes you can get, you know, I'm sure at the time, a lot of the kids in the youth group probably felt like I was showing favoritism to Jaquan. But a lot of them didn't understand the circumstances of Jaquan's life. And you can't use the excuse, if I can't do for everybody, I'm not going to do for anybody. That doesn't hold up. Now, I know you're not going to be able to do for a ton of people. I'm not going to always be able to do for a lot of people. But my prayer for you is when you leave here, as you go into this school year for the kids and the adults, is whenever you hear a need, and something inside of you says, I can do something about that, I want you to feel like you have to do something about that. You may not be able to do it for everybody, but you can do it for somebody.